Simon Norfolk is one of those photographers who really made it worth coming to Bratislava Month of Photography this year. Earlier we recorded an interview in this hostel room and I can't wait to show it to you. It's really great. Simon Norfolk, great to have you. Yesterday you had a wonderful exhibition opening. How's that for you?
Well, it's very interesting. Really, for the last few years, I've shown little pieces of work as I've made them. You know, a little piece from Bosnia, or a little piece from Sarajevo, or a little piece from Afghanistan. And that's the first thing that I've done that looks back across all of what I've done. So, well, not the first time, but the first time in a long time that I've had quite so much work on the wall, but also been able to put together pictures in a new kind of way. So putting together a picture of a destroyed building in Afghanistan and a picture of the supercomputer that designed the weapon that destroyed the building in Afghanistan. So it's quite nice to sort of play with some sort of symmetries and parallels and some little visual games with pairings.
That was the thing that caught my attention the most. I mean, how did you come up with these pairings, these doubles or diptychs?
That kind of dialectical. I've been playing with that for years, really, because always with my work, there's always a thing about beauty and then the horror. You know, the awfulness of what it is I'm photographing, destroyed buildings, or a wall splashed with blood in Baghdad. But then I try and photograph it as beautifully as I can. So there's always been that kind of polar opposites. The thing about two stars revolving around the same black hole. That's kind of how my work's always worked, really, for 20 years.
Well, it's kind of mystical approach. I mean,
mystical,
yeah.
Me?
Yeah, not you, but I mean, all mystical traditions have this. Like in alchemy, they call it coincidentia oppositorum, if you have heard it. It's like that. I mean, it's like this notion.
Are we 2 minutes into this podcast and we're in alchemy?
Yeah. Welcome to my world. I mean, it's like they say that looking at the world from one side, like this is all ugly, this is all beautiful. It does a tremendous injustice to what's happening. Like, it's always both. It's not either or. It's sometimes the hardest horror can provoke tremendous acts of kindness. And,
right. Well,
and vice versa.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I don't think I do it out of a sense of justice, and I don't think you need to look to alchemy for it. I mean, it's that polarity, that dualism, it runs right away through. It's universal. It runs through Christian thought. It runs through Buddhist thought, and it's not. I knew Manichaeus was the person that put it into Christian religion, it just seems to me that dialectical tension between those two things is a very, very interesting place for anybody to make work. Because it seems to me that it makes everything sharper and more tensioned and more, it's like putting salt on your food. It just seems to me that I could make, and I spent a long time thinking about this when I first started this kind of work, but you could make very ugly pictures of a place like Auschwitz. You could make them hard to look at. A lot of architects have decided that the way to memorialize the Holocaust is to make architecture which is ugly and oppressive. Look at the Libeskind Memorial in Berlin. It's not a beautiful object. It's an oppressive and ugly space. But it seemed to me always, and this is a long obsession of mine, that as a photographer, my first problem is audience. Why on earth would you spend a Saturday afternoon going to see some pictures of destroyed buildings in Afghanistan? I don't think the competitors for my work are other photographers. I think the competition for the time you would spend with my work is the time you would otherwise spend sitting in the park or going to the football match or going shopping or doing something much nicer. So for me, it's always been this question of how do you persuade people to come into your space? That's always the first task. I could be the most brilliant avant-gardist, obscurantist photographer in the world, but no one would give a damn about what I did. The first thing you have to do is make people want to be part of what you're doing. And then you can get didactic and you can lecture and you can intrigue and you can beautify and you can seduce and you can do all those things, but you've got to have them first. They've got to be in. Otherwise, your conversation is just with yourself. And the problem when I look at so much modern photography is the conversation is entirely with itself or with a couple hundred other photographers. And I don't really give a crap about what a couple hundred photographers think about my work. I want to have an impact on these people standing out on the street waiting for the tram to go to work.
And does it work for you? I mean...
Well, it feels more satisfying for me. I feel more comfortable with the idea that that a photography audience, like last night, comes to see a show. But also, I've always shown my work in magazines. And a lot of the work that's on that wall has been through magazines, commissioned by or was later sold to magazines. So I always see that as a kind of popularity contest. If it can succeed in a magazine, and that means a general audience are going to like it, but I always think it should try and succeed on a gallery wall too.
Yeah.
It should try and work in both of those places. And that means that maybe it's got that seductive quality to it. I work very hard to make my pictures look very beautiful.
Yeah.
And I watch people in a gallery look at it from a distance and go, oh, that's interesting. Let's go over there and have a look at that. And then when they get there, they go, oh, that's really lovely. That's really great. What is it? And then they read the caption and they go, oh my God, I didn't realize it was that. And that, I think, is how to make work intriguing and interesting, not to put a blob on the wall with no caption, untitled number 47, and never refuse to explain my work and be very avant-garde, but have no audience because the audience just walks away scratching their head.
Yeah, or even worse, like I remember the shock that I had 10 years ago. It was my first time when I went to Perpignan and I was like, oh fuck, I mean, it was just blood and broken bones and but that was the first shock. And the second one was at the end of the festival, when you become completely insensitive to those imagery, and it just looks like screenshots from video games. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe that's the effect of most of that photography. That's like this conventional war photography. It's just at certain level, at certain time, people just don't care anymore.
I don't know how long that feeling lasts, that insensitivity, because I think, it's a Sontag argument about numbness, but I've spent a lot of time around that kind of imagery, as I'm sure you have, and yet there are still things, according to Susan Sontag, I shouldn't be able to be affected by a picture anymore. But then something comes along, like the picture of that little boy, Alan Kurdi, drowned on the beach, and suddenly you're back again.
Yeah, but
I don't think she really explains that. You think that you are numb, and then one thing comes down the road, and suddenly you're right back at the beginning. That little picture of the boy in Assyria sat on the orange seats in the back of the ambulance with blood down his face. It's an awful, tear-provoking picture. So I think she's only half right, and I think you need to push that argument further about insensitivity. But I think you're right about the problem of work is that, and I think it's a little bit kind of childish, that it would be very easy to take, to go to a hospital in Syria and just photograph dead bodies and corpses and blown apart people and blow them up really big and stick them on the wall. But for me, that's a kind of yahoo, it's like a kind of childish, it's the kind of thing people do at art school, Look, I've managed to disgrace you, I've managed to appall you. And that's kind of childish, I think. Yeah. I want to go further now. I'm trying to kind of educate you and intrigue you.
That's one thing, and I congratulate you for that. But I think it's one more aspect which I'd really like to hear your opinion about. It's that as long as the pictures are the way we describe them, like this bloody imagery, the war seems like something that's happening there to those people. But the way you show up and you bring this image of a supercomputer, and suddenly the responsibility comes back home.
Well, yes. I mean, the supercomputer was in Barcelona.
Yeah.
Britain has been a country which has been very successful at designing and selling weaponry. Little countries like Belgium, one of the most successful weapons exporters in the world.
Yeah.
So yes. Well, I remember the first time I went to Afghanistan in 2001 during the invasion, and there were hundreds of photographers there, all clickety-clickety-click with little cameras, and then I came back, and a friend said, show the work to the picture editor of the New York Times magazine. And I was like, God, you think, so I sent them in. And she phoned me up and she said, I didn't know that's what it looked like. And I thought that was an incredible thing to say, because she's the New York Times magazine, right? All the good stuff goes to her first. And this was after Christmas of 2001, so the war had been happening for nearly 3 months of, stuff on our TV. And yet, really, what she had been looking at is the same few war pictures again and again and again. A picture of a wounded kid in the hospital, times 20. A picture of a woman in a burqa crying at a grave, times 37. A picture of a mujahideen pointing at the sky at a vapor trail. Or, not even Afghanistan, a picture of an F-16 taken off from an aircraft carrier. And she'd never seen Afghanistan. She'd never seen the place. And she'd been looking at pictures for 3 months, and she said, I didn't know that's what it looked like. And I thought that was an incredible lacuna, this amazing shadow that you can spend ages looking at war photography and never see the place where the war photography happens, or the consequence of the F-16 taking off, or the vapor trails in the sky. You never see the effect. It seemed to me that, that big camera that I was using was a great way of photographing the consequence, and not just the showbiz of war, but the actual effect that it has on people, on land, on buildings, the bullet holes in the wall, and what it would be like to be in this place when the place was being blown apart by the ultra-high technology of the most successful military machine on Earth.
Moving from war, okay, we don't want to be too depressing, but there is also this, I've seen some of your work on climate change.
Yeah. And there's a possibility that work could be coming to Slovenia next year.
Wow.
The lady who had the Mark Reboot exhibition
Uh-huh.
is trying to get some money together to bring together the Project Pressure work to Slovenia.
Wow, that's nice to hear. I mean, like this, this work that you did on the glacier, and probably something else that I didn't manage to find. I think the same concepts could be applied there, right?
Yeah, about beauty and about seduction and about trying to... It's a slightly different process with the climate change thing, because the sort of... The factual, numerical side of climate change, we all know it's happening. We read an article in the newspaper, oh my God, the temperature has gone up by X, or the sea level has risen by this. And then we close the newspaper and then we forget about it because we just don't have any way of kind of visualizing it and making it seem real in our lives. What, am I supposed to do something different? But does it really make a difference if I recycle my newspapers? Is that going to produce more polar bears? Doesn't seem like it would have a difference. So the problem, I think, with the climate change thing is making these abstract things turn into something visual and real that engages and draws in the audience. So the approaches that I've chosen, I've done 2 glaciers now, one with fire and one that is covered in cloth. And with those, it's more a sort of just trying to engage an audience to make them stop and think about the consequences of climate change in their everyday life. So it's slightly different. I don't want to show you war pictures and turn you into a soldier, but I do want to show you climate change pictures and turn you into someone that does think about, well, maybe not recycling your newspapers, but certainly petitioning a politician about, creating some kind of change,
But the world is changing. I think that, 10 or 15 years ago, recycling was part of a few very, very avant-garde people. Now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
The awareness with the internet and it's mind-blowing today.
Yes, certainly. The soil in which the plant grows is a lot thicker now. Even something that plastic in the ocean is something that kind of came from nowhere, and now it's like really
big issue.
Really big, and it came from nothing to big really quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas the sort of recycling newspaper thing took a very long time, or the nuclear power. Yeah. That feels very positive.
Mm-hmm.
the most recent project that we did on the glacier was on the Horn Glacier in Switzerland, which they are trying to cover with a blanket to stop it disappearing. It's a kind of bizarre, crazy...
I mean, are they serious about it? I mean, this is not some sort of art installation. It's it's a serious effort.
No, it's a commercial thing.
Oh, it's a commercial?
Yeah, the glacier goes very close to the road, and so for 140 years the same family have had a little shop there. And every spring they dig a grotto into the glacier, and you can travel inside the glacier and you can see the blue light, and it's very beautiful. And they charge entry. And over the 140 years, the glacier is just disappearing around the corner. And so they are trying to preserve some of the glacier so that they can preserve their business. It's just economics. And so they're covering a small part of the glacier with a special thermal blanket, which is trying to sort of preserve the ice, and does preserve the ice. They've saved about 25 meters of depth of ice.
Wow.
But obviously it's absurd. And it's... do you have the story of King Canute in Slovenia? You know, in England we had a king who believed that he was so powerful he could stop the tide. So they put him down on the beach and he held up his hand and he got his feet wet, of course. So it's a very famous story in English history. So it's this kind of insane idea, and also it's not scalable. You can't cover the Antarctic in a sheet. It's just mad. But what's happened with this blanket is that it's been on the glacier for 8 years now. The winters have been very bad, and now it's looking very sad, all tattered and ripped and torn. And the way we photographed it is really, when you look at the pictures, you think that the glacier has been got ready to die. Do you have this word shroud? What's this word in
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
it's bird.
right. The cloth that you wrap a body in to place in the ground,
yeah,
right?
like the one from of the Christ.
Yeah, exactly. And it looks Christ-like, and it looks like it's made of marble. It looks like a Pietà, like Michelangelo's Pietà, made from Carrara marble. And the ice is wrapped in this blanket and has this kind of desperate sort of pathetic sort of feel to it. So I can show you the pictures. I've got no power on my laptop. But the idea was really climate change has now got to the point where it's not stoppable. 15 years ago it was stoppable. Now there will be this climate change. And so now we've moved to this period about, well, how are we going to mitigate against it? What are we going to do? And the problem is always economics. It's a problem of capitalism. If the sea level rises, then yes, they can afford to build big walls in downtown New York, which will protect the downtown of New York because that's very valuable real estate. Bangladesh is fucked, right? There's not enough money to protect Bangladesh. So it's going to be this question of exaggerating global inequalities. Yes, we can afford to build seawalls in London and Amsterdam, but little countries in the South Pacific are doomed. And the thing is, they didn't burn the petrol and the hydrocarbons in the first place. It was me that burned the hydrocarbons, flying around the world and driving a car and running an air conditioning unit. So that it's looking at these consequences of climate change now, I think, which is what the Horn Glacier piece is about. That all of these social inequalities are exaggerated by climate change. Because you're poor, you will drown, and it's not even your fault. It's me and my lifestyle. But I am able to walk away with it because we can build higher seawalls, and I can move up into the mountains and the rest of it. It's poor old Bangladesh that is screwed.
Yeah. You started off as a photojournalist, right?
A long time ago.
Yeah, and then you made the transition. From the way we talk today, was that world too narrow for you?
No, not too narrow. I've got a lot of respect for photojournalists, and not so much this kind of great white hunter that flies into the war zone, but certainly the local photographers that I've met in places like Afghanistan and Palestine, incredibly courageous. I mean, really astonishingly brave people. So I have a lot of respect for that. But well, it kind of goes back to one of the early questions he asked about beauty, because I remember a long time ago, I went to Auschwitz, and I was expecting, I don't know, what do you expect when you go to Auschwitz? You expect to feel a certain way, certainly, and you're expecting a certain visual thing, barbed wire, barrack buildings. But the camp at Auschwitz was huge, 250 hectares. And the back of it kind of goes down to the river, and it sort of doesn't feel like a prison at all. It's just a sort of forest. And that part of Poland is very heavily farmed and very mechanically farmed, so it's very bleak. And inside the wire of Auschwitz, it's like a little national park. And when you're in there, you see butterflies and flowers that you just don't see in Poland because it's never been sprayed with pesticide and herbicide, so you get all of this wildlife, and there were deer coming through the woods. And it was beautiful. And it was shocking that it was beautiful, because you had this feeling that it shouldn't be allowed to be beautiful, right? This is not the place for this. But why is this not the place for this? To go back to that thing you were saying about dualism, but we have written a religion in this part of the world, or a series of ideas which has this really childish simplicity that which is good is beautiful, and we expect evil to be ugly, right? Yeah. And that is babyish. But we carry that through our entire life. Look at the way Hollywood movie designers, go back to video games. What does the baddie look like in a video game? He's got the scar, he's got the dark eyes, What does the goodie look like? He's got the blue eyes, the fair hair, he's handsome.
Sometimes it's completely the opposite in the real life.
Well, exactly.
Some of the most people are...
You've met that guy, you've met that beautiful bastard. We've all done that, right? But we still go through life with this bizarre binocular viewpoint that which is beautiful must be good, and that which is ugly must be evil.
Do you think this is like...
and I think photographically playing with that and reversing it and not giving you and then surprising you with the opposite is exactly a really interesting place to make any kind of artwork. I mean, it'd be a great place to make an opera or a haiku, but I make photographs.
I remember, I usually photograph weddings, but every now and then I'm commissioned to shoot a funeral or something.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes when there is some like special funeral, a certain young person dies, and it's going to be huge. Sometimes they hire a photographer too.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. I've been hired a couple of times.
Oh, I never heard that.
And the first time that happened, at the beginning it was just like you said. Oh, I'm supposed to feel heavy, sad. But after I started taking photos, I just fall into this photographic mode when it's just all shapes and colors and light and shadow. And I started actually enjoying it, and I felt guilty about it first time. And I didn't know really how to deal with those emotions. Like, I'm doing this work here and it's beautiful. I mean, the pictures are great and I'm proud of them, but...
And they're relying on your professionalism.
Yeah, but...
they didn't pay you to sit in the corner and cry. They paid you to do a job because they need you for the future to show their children the pictures of the funeral.
And it was the same emotion. It was like mind blown. I didn't know...
But it's only mind blown because we have this incredible orthodoxy that you're not meant to think that.
Yeah.
And then...
Do you think this is
and it's the orthodoxy that is, foolish.
Yeah. You think this is like a vicious cycle, like you are conditioned in your childhood by these fairy tales, and then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then you just replicate that, and it goes around and around at every generation.
I'm not sure why the real, the place where you can see it so palpably shown, is like Disney. Children's TV, children's film is fantastic for this. Look at the faces on the Wicked Witch and the evil stepmother, and look at the faces of the heroes in Disney movies. Whether it's Snow White that I saw when I was young, or whether it's Mulan, nowadays in modern stuff. Why do we do it? Well, I guess it must be socially useful in a way, but you would think it would be.
Maybe it's just comforting.
Comforting?
It creates a simplistic, like we said earlier, it creates a simplistic version of the world, which is easier to
Evil
grasp.
is too complicated.
Yeah.
Yes, but most things in society are, defensive. We build these things because they enable to shield us from things, whereas, you would think in evolutionary terms, thinking in such a simplistic way is a good way of walking into a trap. In kind of dark...
Or avoiding the trap.
Equally. I don't know.
Just make
I'm trying to think of it. How would Charles Darwin think of it? He would think, yeah, I have no idea why we had this. We all carry these kind of. It's like a compass. It's like a misaligned compass, and we walk through the world with it. And that's why it seems to me a great place to make work, because it's playing with those anticipations and those prejudices and reversing them and surprising them and giving you what you want and then taking it away. And that's an interesting place to make work.
You come out as a very well-read guy, somebody who thinks deeply about things. How do you prepare for your projects? I mean, is this part of your process to study a lot before you go out with a camera?
Yeah. Well, I don't waste my time in modern art galleries, that's for sure, because there's nothing useful in there. I spend a lot of time in museums, and I studied geography and philosophy at university, so kind of liberal arts. I'm interested in the kind of historical thickness of things, so I'm always trying to place. I'm not the first person to ever think of anything I've ever done. There's always other people before me, and so I've always spent my time researching these kind of histories. I mean, but I do spend a lot of time research. Even I'm just starting now an assignment for National Geographic in Jerusalem about archaeology, but it's requiring me to read tons of stuff about the history of Judaism, which is not something I know anything about, and the archaeology of Israel in the Bronze Age, which I'm an expert in. It's Iron Age archaeology in the Middle East, which is a very controversial subject. I enjoy all that side of it, that intellectual side of it. I've got to say, also, I do enjoy particularly things like the glaciers, and more these days that I'm really not interested in taking on a job unless it's got a slightly mad mountaineering, going to somewhere improbable, if it involves some new piece of equipment and a new technology and something that really kind of interests me and intrigues me, then preferably in some ridiculous country where really you shouldn't be, then I'm quite excited about that. So yes, there's a sort of academic, intellectual side to it. Research, I think research is really important, and it's a thing that I completely want to see in work which is shown to me by students and master classes and things, but also I do quite like if it involves climbing a glacier or flying to Afghanistan, or this new job I'm trying to get my head around photogrammetry for this new thing, trying to create 3D spaces, which is a whole new technology which I don't really understand, but I'm trying to get my head around it. And also a photographic technique called Reflectance transformation imagery, which is it's a thing that museums use for photographing coins. It's using a camera to it's computational photography.
So it's like a 3D thing?
Yes, it's using a camera to make distance, not to use, making a photograph but not using light, using a photograph that understands distance.
And it's then like a 3D map. And
then putting all those distances into a point cloud and then into 3D software, and then you can turn the thing around in 3D space and look at it and travel through it.
Wow.
Using gaming software.
Wow, that's great.
Yes, it's all very complicated. I'm just at the beginning of trying to understand it.
So yeah, there's this like huge new frontier now, right? With modern
technology. I think computational photography is very interesting. Starting to work with different wavelengths and starting to work with different technologies that can drop this rather simplistic two-dimensional technology into something much more complicated is very exciting.
Yeah, but at the same time, the traditional photography is still very much relevant. I mean, from what I've seen yesterday, you still work a lot with large format film.
Actually, I've just got my 5.4 film camera out of the cupboard for the first time in 10 years and loaded dark slides to shoot portraits. So yes, I've got a big digital camera for this job in Jerusalem, But I'm also shooting 5:4 portraits for the first time in a long time as well. And photogrammetry.
What advantages do you still find in film for your work?
Oh, well, I have to confess that the film camera for this job is, I don't need the quality. The digital camera is the same quality-wise. I have some quite difficult people to photograph. And it occurs to me that the 5:4 camera is theatrical. It's a big show. And I think some people who are quite difficult to photograph, I think it might just persuade them to be photographed and just intimidate them a little bit into sitting for a proper picture. Whereas I think normally if you turn up with a little camera like this, I think they would just say, no, you look like a newspaper photographer. But this guy that turns up with this great big piece of wooden camera made of leather with the big red cloth over his head and the focusing loop and the theatre of it, it's like a pantomime. And I think that might be quite useful in terms of just persuading these people to play.
Wow, so the future is exciting.
I don't know. I'm 55 years old.
What does that mean? I mean, you can still have...
My mother used to say, when are you going to get a proper job? And I'd say, Mum, I have the cover of the New York Times magazine. And she'd say, oh, and do you get paid as well? I'm like, yes, it's my job, Mum.
Isn't this a dilemma of every mother and every photographer?
I don't know. But I mean, I feel it as well. I don't really feel that I have a proper job. My problem is, I'm married to a very wonderful woman who is a doctor. And she's a surgeon. And she says, what did you do today? And I say, well, I made some coloured pieces of paper and they gave me a prize. And I say, what did you do? And she said, well, I put a man's arm back on. Right? So that's the reality check that I live with. Because it seems that my life is pretty foolish. I fly to Afghanistan, I mess around with technology, I get given prizes at big shows where everybody says super things. And then meanwhile, my wife is putting a man's hand back on, which seems to me something much more important and useful and crucial in this world. And that what I do is pretty trivial and pretty stupid. So I'm very, very fortunate that I'm married to a very wonderful woman who does something very real.
So let's finish with that. Simon, thank you very much for taking it.
Oh, you're very